would you have that ultimate perspective? How would you have that vantage point that would enable you to see that and know that? Which means you're assuming the kind of knowledge of spiritual reality that you're saying nobody else can have. So there's a faith you've got in your own perception that's at the root of that doubt. Here's a second objection: evil and suffering. A lot of people say, well, I cannot believe in a God who is allowed evil and suffering the way I've seen this evil and suffering. We just can't believe in a God like that. I don't think there can be a God. Look at all the evil and suffering. Now, by the way, if somebody says that to me and they actually are right now in the grips of some horrible suffering, I wouldn't say what I'm about to tell you. I would weep with those who weep and offer prayer, etc. I mean, it makes a tremendous. It's very, very difficult to see clearly when you're in the midst of agony and pain. But if somebody says, well, there just can't be a God who would allow evil and suffering in this world. Either he's good and not all powerful, or he's all powerful and he's not all good, but he couldn't be good and all powerful. But here's the presumption in that statement. When you say there can't be a God who allows this kind of evil and suffering, what you really mean is, here's your assumption: if I can't think of any good reason why God would allow evil and suffering, there can't be any. See? The only way you can say there can't be a God is why? Because there can't be a good reason for him to allow evil and suffering. Wait a minute, he's God. Maybe he does have one that you don't. Can't be. So what is your faith there? Your faith is in your powers of exhaustive surveillance of the all down the corridors of history and time, and you know that there can't be any possible good reason why God would allow evil and suffering. So there's a faith there. Charles Taylor, the philosopher, Canadian philosopher, said that up until 500 years ago, people suffered in the past worse than we suffer now, probably, if anything, or at least the average person does. And so people cried out in agony, and they asked, why, Lord? But up until about 500 years ago, nobody said that was the basis for saying there can't be a God. Taylor says the reason why we say it today is because our ancestors had more humility. That what they actually said is, well, if there is a God, of course he would know things that we don't know, so there we are. Modern people don't believe that. Modern people say, if I can't think of anything, there can't be a God up there who knows something I don't know. And Taylor says it's because of our infinitely inflated faith in our own surveillance, our own powers of surveillance, our own rationality. That's the reason why the argument against evil and suffering seems to be so potent today, but there's faith in it. Let me give you one more idea. Most of the objections to things in the Bible that I hear, people say, I can't believe in Christianity because the Bible says this, or the Bible says this, and that's offensive to me. It's awful. How can we believe in something so awful? I can't believe in Christianity because that thing in the Bible offends me. Okay. Do you realize how much faith you have in your culture? Do you realize that you're on the verge of being kind of cosmically ethnocentric? Over in Britain once, I was speaking to a group on this sort of subject, and I talked afterwards to a Chinese graduate student, brilliant young man at Oxford University, and he was not a believer. Of course, he had no Christian background. And you know what he said to me? He says, it doesn't the idea of a God sending people to hell, that doesn't bother me. He says, I'm not a Westerner. He says, I don't think the universe has to be a democracy. He says, if there's a God, of course he makes you, and therefore he has the right to do what he wants. I don't have the squeamish problems that Westerners have about that. But he says, reason I can't be a Christian is you're telling me that if I become a Christian, I may not go into the afterlife with my ancestors. And he says, I cannot handle that. He says, that's too individualistic for me. I believe I'm one with my ancestors, and wherever I go in the afterlife, I got to be with my ancestors. Now, I've been around Manhattan for 28 years. I haven't talked to many people who say the big problem I have with Christianity is I won't be with my ancestors. That's not what they say. I talked to a Middle Eastern man, you can imagine this, a Middle Eastern man who said to me, I got no problem with Christianity when it says God will judge people and send people to hell. That doesn't bother me. I'm not like Western people. I believe in authority. But he says, what I cannot stand, and I believe it's absolutely wrong, is what the Bible says about forgiveness. No matter what people do to you, you have to forgive. Forgive 70 times 7. He says that would be awful. That would be outrageous. Now again, around Manhattan, a lot of people tell me, they don't like the Bible, but almost none of them say because there's too much in it about forgiveness. But in Manhattan, what do people say? I can't believe in a God who would send people to hell. Okay, so your culture is better than their culture. Is that what you're saying? And your objection, you have the ultimate cultural vantage point now. And by the way, don't forget that you're also saying that your great-grandchildren are not going to think you're stupid, just the way you think your great-grandparents had all sorts of views that were horrible and regressive and terrible, and you wouldn't want to have anything to do with them. Your great-grandchildren are going to feel the same way about you. You don't think so. You think you've arrived at the ultimate cultural moment, and because you're from the West, you have the ultimate culture, and you don't want to say that Chinese culture and the Middle Eastern culture is wrong, but you really think it is, except you don't really have the right to say that. And therefore, wait a minute. If the Bible, just for a minute, just for the sake of argument, if the Bible actually was from God, it wouldn't be the product of any one culture, right? And that means it would offend every culture somewhere. And so, if you are offended by some things in the Bible because of your advanced modern Western culture, it's only what you would expect if it was the revelation of God. And so you actually have a certain faith in your, almost a kind of ethnocentric faith in your culture, generally, when you object to Christianity on the basis of things that you see in the Bible. You see the point? Here's the point. If you're a secular person and you don't believe in God, if you're a religious person you do believe in God, you have arrived at the place you have arrived at through a combination of reason and faith. Don't say the person who is secular gets there through reason and the person who's religious gets there through faith. No. You both use both faith and reason. Both belief in a universe without God and belief in a universe with God, you can't prove them empirically. They're not self-evident to everybody. And yet, why do you believe what they do? Why do you believe them? You believe your positions because of a combination of what I'll call faith and reason, or I'll go a little further. Aristotle said that persuasion was made of 3 things: logos, pathos, ethos. Logos means reason. One of the reasons you arrive at a certain place is there's logical arguments for it. Pathos has to do with emotion and feeling. One of the reasons why you arrive at that position is not just that it makes sense to your head, but it makes sense to your heart. It fits your heart. It fits your sensibilities. It's intuitively right. And then thirdly, logos, pathos, ethos. Now, there's a lot of ways, those of you who actually do know Aristotle. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just a minister. But anyway, the third would be, is how do you see that position played out in people's lives? If I become a Christian, or I'm not, to a great degree, people who become Christians, logos, pathos, ethos, they see some reasons, it makes sense to their hearts, and they see it being lived out in certain people's lives, and that makes sense to you. Why do people stop being Christians or are not Christians? Usually, they've got reasons. There's some aspects of Christianity that don't make sense to their heart, and they see either people living out a secular worldview in a way that makes sense to them culturally and socially, or they see Christians living in ways that they think is terrible for us culturally and socially. And therefore, basically, you come to the position of where you are in your belief because your position you think makes more emotional, cultural, and rational sense than the alternatives. If you're a Christian, it's because you believe that Christianity makes more emotional, cultural, and rational sense of the alternatives. If you're a Buddhist, if you're an atheist, if you are a kind of like no religious preference, agnostic, it's always because my position made more sense emotionally, culturally, and rationally than the alternatives. Now, the only thing I have time to do now, before I do want to have time for questions, is say, how would Christianity, or how would a Christian, and I am a Christian, go about actually saying to somebody, here's why I think Christianity makes more emotional, cultural, and rational sense than the alternatives? How would I make that case? And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through it. I'm not going to make the arguments. I don't have time to make the arguments. But what I do, I'm only going to give you the conclusions, which in some of your cases will probably be infuriating. You say, how did they get to that? Well, if I had the time, I would try. I'm not sure I would convince you, but and nothing here I'm saying is, couldn't at least some kind of argument be made. But here's what I like to do. First of all, how would Christianity, this is brief, how would Christianity make sense emotionally and culturally? The way I would go about it would be to look at 6 issues: meaning, satisfaction, freedom, identity, justice, and hope. Now, I believe across all cultures and all religions, nobody can live life, no human being can live life without those things, without achieving some semblance of those things. You have to have meaning, you have to have satisfaction or happiness, you have to have a sense that I'm free, not enslaved. Identity, I know who I am, I have that sense of self-worth and significance. Justice, I've got a basis for doing justice, and hope that can face the future. Everybody's got to have those 6 things. My argument would be, and I'll just make it right here, and that is that Christianity has unparalleled resources for those 6 things. Not only can Christianity explain why we have those needs, but it gives you, I would say, unparalleled resources to meet those things. Christianity gives you a meaning in life that suffering can't take away. It gives you a satisfaction that's not based on the changing circumstances. It gives you a freedom that enhances love, it intensifies love rather than undermines it. It gives you an identity that's not based on your performance, and therefore is far less crushing and fragile than modern identity. It gives you also a basis for doing justice that doesn't turn you into an oppressor yourself.